Hi everybody and welcome to week 9 of Introduction to Research. So this week we are changing the flavour a little bit of what we've been studying. Up until now we've been looking really quite deeply into some of the theories and methodologies and ideologies that sit inside the research that we can do. So some of that sort of background understanding and thinking that goes on when we're planning some research and the different ways that we can frame that research to make it answer the questions we want it to answer. And on the basis of what you've learnt from those modules, that's what your first assessment is based on. Once you've done that assessment, it's time to move on, and we're moving away from the theory and the thinking and sort of the ideologies and looking in a much more practical way about how some of these methodologies work and how they can be applied to information studies research. So that's what we're starting to look at from today in Module 6. And you can see here this is the first page of Module 6. So Module 6, what we're going to do is look at the top four different types of research methods here. And the fifth one there, grounded theory, we had a quick look at in Module 5. Now for each of these four, there is a page within our module, and there's also a link out to some reading that you can do in the Picard textbook. And so we don't go into a great deal of detail for each of them here in the module, but you can learn more about it in the textbook if you want to. So let's go and have a quick look at each of them. Usability studies is pretty basic. It's just the idea of often it's a bit of software or a process that people have to use, and then testing it on a user to see how useful, how easy it is to use. So it's kind of like doing a pilot study and just taking a group of people or an individual through a process to see whether it works, whether it's in a logical sequence. It's like giving someone I did one the other day for one of our PhD students up at CSU in Wagga, and she's doing this really cool study where she is looking at, I've got to get this right, she is looking at where our eyes go, so our eyes, where they track across a screen when we're using an online index for an ebook. So the thing that she's sort of trying to find out is how well are indexes put together for ebooks. Are they usable? Are they user friendly? And so she's doing basically a usability study on ebook indexes. And to do that, she has got this software running where she can track how our eyes move across a screen to track through and use an index. So it was really cool. So what she got me to do was a usability study for her eye tracking software. So she had a pretend index up there for a pretend ebook, and she gave me a couple of questions. She said, go and find out X, Y, and Z that's somewhere in this book and use the index to find that information. And then she ran this eye tracking software to see where my eyes were going around the screen to see how efficient it was for me to use the index. So that was a really nice way of doing a usability study using some really cool eye tracking software. But that's the basic idea, is giving something to someone to use to see how easy it is for that thing to be used. So that's usability analysis. Next one we look at here is a Delphi study. Delphi studies are basically just a way of asking experts about something that they are experts in, and I tend to ask, like maybe you might have 10 experts in a thing, and you ask each of them exactly the same question or set of questions, but not when they can hear each other's answers. So you do each of them individually, and there's some really good reasons why we do that, and you'll read about that as you go through. Basically it's just so the loudest voice doesn't dominate and other people get a chance to speak and not be influenced by each other, and sort of avoid that whole group think thing that can happen in focus groups where everyone just goes, oh yeah, I agree with him. So what they do is do everybody individually, and then they start feeding back what they've heard to each of the experts and saying, do you agree with this? What do you think about that? And they do this over and over and over to all the different experts until they come to a consensus or to an idea that a consensus can't be reached. So they get to the point where they reckon they've got the answer to the thing that they're looking for and everybody agrees with it, or they get to a point where they say there is no clear answer to this problem that everybody can agree on. No experts can agree on the one answer to this particular problem. So there's a little video in here. It only goes for a couple of minutes, and it looks pretty funny because it's a guy standing in front of his couch, but he actually explains it really well. So that is Delphi Study, and then there's a chapter on that as well that you can read really in great detail if you want to, or you can just zip through it. The most important thing for this week, though, is just to be aware what each of these four types of studies are and basically how they're used. So you'll get that just from reading the module. If you've got time, dig into the textbook as well, or if you're particularly interested in any of them. And I'm aware also that this week you've got your online test to be grappling with, so you might want to come back to this module later when you get across that whole thing, the test. The next one we look at here is action research. Action research is often done in the workplace. It's a really sort of practical way of researching, and basically what it is where you've got, and we've got a little video here that explains it quite well, but I think the thing that this video doesn't really make particularly clear is that the action research is in a cycle. So you might start off with a problem where you might say, I don't know, nobody's coming into our library on Friday nights. So let's see if we can, let's do something, let's change something to see whether that makes a difference. And so you might change something, you might open the library later, or you might do some marketing in a particular, the local newsletter, and then you'll see, did that make a difference? And so you'll measure the change, and then if it made a difference, then you might then say, okay, so each week we need to put in an announcement in the newsletter, or it might make no difference, so then you might try something else. And so it's really just a way of trying to solve a problem by making a change somewhere and seeing what happens. And then if it's a good change, stick with it. If it didn't work, try something else. So it's really this sort of process of action based on change and seeing what the outcome is from that. So have a look at the video here, and there's also a whole chapter about it as well in Picard that you can dip into. And historical research is really just looking at existing data. So it doesn't have to be looking at stuff from history. It can be looking at data that has been initially already created, rather than going out there and creating data yourself by doing studies and research and interviews and all that sort of thing. It's basically that whole idea of desk research, where you look at existing data rather than creating your own new data. So that is historical research, and again there's a little, it's a pretty easy concept, but there's a chapter in there as well. And then we've got here a chance for you to find a piece of research that uses any of those four methods and pop that into the discussion list and tell us why you think that's a good example of that particular type of research. So, and then the next thing I've just got is some reading for you. If you are really interested, there's some interesting research there. There's some more reading there for you to do. So, important things for this week. Get your test done, and then in terms of understanding for this week, at least have in your head what those four types of research methodologies are, how they work, and perhaps have a little bit of a think about how you might implement them in your workplace or somewhere else that you've worked in the past. And that's it. Good luck with the test. I expect that you'll all do extremely well, and I hope that you don't find it too hard, and of course get in touch with me if you need help with anything. Thanks guys. See ya.